The sandstorm hit Kandahar at 3:47 hours, turning the night into a wall of orange static. On the flight line, crew chiefs covered their faces and secured tie-downs while the wind screamed through the hardstands. Inside the operations bunker, Major Keller watched the weather radar bloom red across 3 provinces. Every aircraft was grounded, every mission scrubbed, every pilot stood down except one. Captain Veronica Hale sat alone in the briefing room, her flight suit still smelling of JP-8 and cordite from the previous sortie. The call sign Reaper was stitched above her left breast pocket, faded from sun and wear. She'd been flying close air support for 11 months, logging more combat hours than pilots twice her rank, yet the younger officers still called her the old lady when they thought she couldn't hear. At 38, she was ancient by fighter pilot standards, a relic from another war. The secure phone rang once. Keller answered it, listened for 40 seconds, then hung up without speaking. His face went pale. He walked to the briefing room and opened the door without knocking. "Reaper, gear up." Veronica looked at the sand beating against the reinforced windows. "Sir, nothing's flying in this." SEAL Team 6 is pinned down 12 miles north of the Helmand Line. 8 men. They went dark 4 hours ago during a high-value target raid. Last transmission said they had wounded and were taking effective fire from a fortified compound. QRF can't reach them by ground. Dust-off birds can't get airborne. You're it. She stood slowly, her knees crackling. "What's the ceiling?" 50 feet, maybe less. Surface winds 40 knots, gusting 60. Visibility. Keller met her eyes, near zero. The younger pilots had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the sound of mission prep during a weather hold. Lieutenant Drummond whispered something to his wingman and smirked. Veronica saw it but didn't react. She'd learned long ago that respect wasn't given to women who flew ugly planes low and slow. It was earned in blood, one sortie at a time, until even the doubters shut their mouths. "What's the target package?" she asked. Keller handed her a tablet. Satellite imagery showed a compound surrounded by open desert, 8 thermal signatures clustered in one corner, at least 30 hostiles in fighting positions. The SEALs had been trying to extract a Taliban commander when the operation collapsed. Now they were trapped, ammunition running low, with a wounded officer who wouldn't survive another hour without medevac. "They're calling for danger-close fire support," Keller said quietly. 30 meters from friendly positions, in a sandstorm at night. Veronica studied the imagery. "What's the SEAL team leader's name?" "Lieutenant Commander Marcus Faraday." Something flickered across her face, gone before Keller could read it. She closed the tablet. "I'll need a full combat load. All guns. 30 Mike and whatever Mavericks you can hang." The A-10 Thunderbolt II was never designed to be beautiful. Squatting on the tarmac like a malformed insect, it looked crude and utilitarian compared to the sleek F-16s parked nearby. Its titanium bathtub cockpit was designed to keep pilots alive when everything else failed. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon mounted in its nose could fire depleted uranium rounds at 70 rounds per second, turning tanks into scrap metal. It was a flying gun platform, built around a single terrifying purpose. Veronica walked her pre-flight by muscle memory, checking control surfaces and weapons pylons while the sandstorm tried to peel the skin off her face. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant Ochoa, had to shout over the wind. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the patches where shrapnel had been welded over. This particular aircraft, tail number 80246, had been her mount for the entire deployment. She knew every vibration, every quirk in the hydraulics, every place the frame groaned under G-forces. "What's your daughter's name again?" she asked. Ochoa blinked against the sand. "Sophia, why?" "Because I'm coming back, and I'm going to bring her that stuffed camel I promised." The crew chief stepped back and saluted, his hand trembling slightly. The cockpit was familiar darkness punctuated by green instrument glow. Veronica strapped in with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the startup sequence while the wind rocked the aircraft on its landing gear. The auxiliary power unit whined to life. Hydraulic pressure built. The heads-up display flickered on, projecting flight data onto the windscreen she couldn't see through. Tower frequency crackled in her helmet. Reaper Tower. Winds are 42 knots gusting 6.5. Visibility less than 1/8 mile. Recommend abort. Tower Reaper. Continuing takeoff. Reaper, be advised. This station is officially logging your departure as against standing weather minimums. Copy that, Reaper's rolling. She pushed the throttles forward. The twin turbofan engines spooled up with a building roar that penetrated even the sandstorm's fury. The A-10 lurched forward, shaking as crosswinds hammered the control surfaces. Veronica fed in rudder corrections, keeping the nose aligned with the runway centerline she couldn't see. Airspeed built slowly, agonizingly, as the storm tried to hold her down. 80 knots, 100. The nose gear wanted to skip sideways. She countered with aileron, feeling the aircraft fight her like a living thing that knew they shouldn't be flying. 130 knots. The main gear lifted, then slammed back down as a gust caught the vertical stabilizer. At 150 knots, she rotated firmly, pulling the stick back into her lap. The A-10 clawed into the air, immediately swallowed by orange darkness. Visibility went to 0. Sand particles screamed past the canopy like tracer fire. The aircraft bucked and rolled, trying to flip inverted. Veronica flew by instruments alone, trusting the attitude indicator and nothing else. Her hand stayed smooth on the controls, making small corrections that kept them climbing through turbulence that would have torn a lighter aircraft apart. At 3,000 feet, they broke through the top of the sandstorm into crystalline desert night. Stars blazed overhead with prehistoric clarity. The moon hung low and full, painting the storm below silver white. It looked peaceful from above, almost beautiful, until you remembered what lay beneath. Veronica leveled off and checked her navigation system, 12 miles to target. She pushed the throttles up, watching the airspeed climb to 300 knots. The A-10 wasn't fast, but it was reliable. Its redundant systems and armored construction had brought pilots home missing engines, with hydraulics shot away, with holes you could crawl through. It was built to survive, and tonight, that was the only thing that mattered. The radio crackled with a new voice, rough and desperate. Any aircraft, this is Kodiak 6. We are troops in contact, danger close, multiple casualties. Request immediate air support. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Faraday. She'd recognize that voice anywhere, even through the static and exhaustion. Kodiak 6, Reaper 2-1. I'm 5 minutes out. Send your 9 line. There was a pause, filled only with distant gunfire over the radio. When Faraday spoke again, disbelief colored his voice. Reaper 2-1, say again your call sign. Reaper, now send me that 9 line before you bleed out, Commander. Another pause. Then quieter, copy Reaper. Line 1, grid November Charlie 742389. Line 2, heading 090. Line 3, 50 meters. Line 4, smoke upon request. Line 5, we have 1 urgent surgical, 2 priority. Line 6, advised we are in a courtyard southeast corner of the compound. Hostiles are in elevated positions north and west walls. Line 7, orange panel marking friendly position. Line 8, we need guns, danger close, 30 meters. Line 9, egress southwest. Reaper, we're almost out of ammunition. They're massing for an assault. Veronica copied the coordinates into her targeting computer while descending back toward the storm. Kodiak 6, understand you have wounded and are low on ammunition. Can you mark enemy positions with IR? Negative, our designator took a round. We've got tracers and prayers, that's it. Copy, I'm coming in under the weather. Stay down and stay tight. When you hear my gun, that's your cue to move. Reaper, Faraday's voice caught. Is this really you? She didn't answer. The A-10 plunged back into the sandstorm, and the world became violence again. 50 feet above ground level, flying by radar altimeter and instinct, Veronica began her approach. The targeting pod was useless in these conditions. She'd have to do this the old way, with eyeballs and timing and 15 years of muscle memory. The compound appeared as a darker mass against the darkness, barely visible through the swirling sand. Veronica spotted muzzle flashes first, winking orange from elevated positions exactly where Faraday had called them. She banked hard right, pulling 4GS in the turn, lining up for a gun run from the west. The A-10 shuddered as wind gusts tried to push her into the ground. Her finger hovered over the trigger, 30 meters from friendly positions, less than the length of 3 school buses. If she misjudged by even a second, she'd kill the men she was trying to save. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger roared to life, and the entire aircraft shook like it was tearing itself apart. The sound was indescribable, a mechanical bellow that drowned out even the storm. 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium tore through the compound's north wall, exploding mud, brick, and flesh in equal measure. Veronica walked the fire along the parapet, watching her tracers draw a line of death through the hostile positions. 3 seconds, 4, 5. She released the trigger and pulled up hard, the G-forces crushing her into the seat. The A-10 climbed back into the darkness while debris rained down on the compound below. Faraday's voice came through, breathless. "Reaper, good hits. North wall is clear. We're moving to breach." Negative, Kodiak 6. Stay in position, I'm not done. She circled back through the storm, recalculating angles in her head. The west wall still had hostiles, but they were repositioning now, aware of the threat above. Smart. Trained. This wasn't some ragtag militia. These fighters knew what they were doing. Veronica came in from the south this time, approaching at an angle that would keep the SEALs clear of her fire cone. The targeting solution formed in her mind automatically, years of combat experience compressing into instant calculation. She triggered another burst, 5 seconds of sustained fire that turned the west wall into a crater. Dust and smoke mixed with the sandstorm, creating a fog of war so thick she was flying purely on instruments. Kodiak 6, west wall is suppressed. What's your status? We've got movement in the main building. Infantry dismounting from technicals in the courtyard. Reaper, they're coming for us. She checked her ammunition counter. Still plenty of 30 Mike left. Describe the building. 2-story flat roof, southeast side of the compound. We're in an outbuilding 10 meters south. Veronica studied the mental image she'd built from the brief glimpses through the sand. A 2-story building in a firefight, with friendlies nearby. Wrong angle and she'd bring the whole structure down on both sides. Kodiak 6, mark your position with IR strobe. I need to know exactly where you are. The infrared strobe appeared in her night vision display, a pulsing star in the chaos. Veronica measured distances, calculated trajectories, and set up for a high-angle pass. The A-10 came in at 60 degrees, nose down, diving through turbulence that would have terrified a sane pilot. At the last possible second, she fired a single AGM-65 Maverick missile. The weapon corkscrewed through the sandstorm, its seeker head locked on the thermal signature of the building. It impacted the second floor with a flash that briefly illuminated the entire compound. The explosion gutted the structure, collapsing the roof and sending fighters tumbling from windows. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition inside cooked off. Veronica pulled out of the dive at 200 feet, feeling the airframe groan under the stress. Her altitude warning was screaming. The stall warning joined in. She ignored both, trusting the A-10's reputation for taking abuse that would destroy other aircraft. Kodiak 6, building is neutralized, prepare to move. Faraday didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was strained with pain. Reaper, we've got a problem. Johnson took shrapnel, femoral bleed. He won't make it to exfil. How long does he have? Minutes, maybe less. Veronica glanced at her fuel gauge. She'd burned through reserves just getting here. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The nearest surgical facility was 40 miles away, and the QRF still couldn't get through by ground. Kodiak 6, can you stabilize him? We're trying, but we need medevac now. The impossible situation crystallized with perfect clarity. No dust-off birds could fly in these conditions. Ground transport couldn't reach them in time. The wounded seal would die in the sand, surrounded by enemy fighters, unless someone did something desperate. Veronica made the decision in under 2 seconds. Kodiak 6, secure your perimeter. I'm coming down. Static filled the channel. Then, Reaper say again. I said I'm landing. You're going to load your wounded on my aircraft, and I'm getting him to surgery. Reaper, you can't land an A-10 in a sandstorm in a hostile compound. Watch me. She circled the compound once more, identifying a stretch of relatively clear ground southeast of the buildings. Maybe 300 feet long, scattered with debris, pockmarked with shell craters. It was barely long enough for a helicopter landing zone, let alone a fixed-wing aircraft. The A-10's minimum landing distance was 2,000 feet on a good day. This wasn't a good day. Veronica configured for landing, dropping flaps and lowering the landing gear. The aircraft's attitude changed immediately, becoming nose-high and sluggish. She lined up her approach using nothing but memory and intuition, the compound's rough outline barely visible through the sandstorm. Her descent rate was too fast, but she couldn't slow down without losing the airspeed she needed to punch through the wind shear. At 100 feet she could see the ground rushing up, debris field, crater, burning wreckage from her missile strike. The landing zone looked impossibly small, impossibly rough. 50 feet. She chopped the throttles and flared hard, bleeding off airspeed. The A-10 settled toward the ground with all the grace of a falling refrigerator. The stall warning was constant now, a shrill scream in her headset. The main gear hit first, slamming into earth hard enough to crack fillings. The nose gear followed a second later, bouncing once before staying down. Veronica stood on the brakes, feeling them grab and release as the anti-skid system fought for traction on loose sand. The aircraft slewed sideways. She corrected with rudder, fighting to keep it straight as they careered toward the compound wall. 100 feet remaining, 50, 25. The A-10 lurched to a stop with the nose less than 10 feet from a pile of rubble. Dust and sand engulfed the aircraft. Veronica's hands were shaking on the controls, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She forced them still. Kodiak 6, I'm down. Bring me your wounded. Shapes emerged from the sandstorm, moving fast and tactical. 8 operators in full kit, carrying a 9th man on a stretcher improvised from combat shirts. Even through the canopy, Veronica could see the blood. Too much blood. Lieutenant Commander Faraday looked up at her cockpit, and for just a moment, through night vision and dust and years of separation, their eyes met. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something more complex. Grief, regret, desperate hope. Get him on the wing, Veronica ordered over the external radio. Strap him down however you can. Everyone else perimeter security. We're only on the ground for 60 seconds. The SEALs worked with desperate efficiency, securing the wounded operator to the A-10's wing route using cargo straps and carabiners. It was crude and dangerous and completely against every regulation ever written. The wounded man, a young petty officer whose name tape read Johnson, was barely conscious, his face pale as moonlight. Faraday jumped up on the wing beside him, his hand on Johnson's shoulder. I'm staying with him. The hell you are, Veronica shot back. You're too heavy. I need every pound to clear this compound. He's my responsibility. And getting all 3 of us killed helps him how? Gunfire erupted from somewhere beyond the compound wall. The remaining SEALs returned fire, their rifles chattering in controlled bursts. Tracer rounds cut through the sandstorm like laser fire in a science fiction movie. More hostiles were coming, drawn by the sound of the landing. "Time's up," Veronica said. "Faraday, get off my aircraft." He didn't move. His jaw was set in that stubborn line she remembered from a lifetime ago. "I'm not leaving him." She could argue, she could threaten, she could waste precious seconds they didn't have. Instead, she made a different calculation. "Fine, but if we crash, I'm haunting you." Faraday secured himself to the wing alongside Johnson, using every anchor point he could find. It was insane. It was suicidal. It violated every safety protocol in military aviation. But Johnson wouldn't survive without medical attention, and sometimes the only choice left was the impossible one. "All Kodiak elements clear the aircraft," Veronica called. "I'm taking off in 10 seconds." The SEALs fell back, still firing at shapes in the storm. Veronica ran through the shortest pre-takeoff checklist in history, checking only the critical systems: engine temps, hydraulic pressure, flight controls. Everything else would have to take care of itself. She pushed the throttles to maximum power. The engine screamed, pushing the A-10 forward through sand and debris. She'd be taking off downwind, with 2 men strapped to her wing in near-zero visibility from a runway that wasn't a runway. The aircraft accelerated sluggishly, weighted down by ordnance and passengers and the sheer audacity of what she was attempting. 50 knots, 60, something solid crunched under the landing gear. The aircraft lurched but kept moving. Veronica held the stick neutral, letting speed build. 70 knots, 80. The compound wall was coming up fast, a dark mass in the darkness. At 90 knots, she pulled back on the stick. The A-10 lifted off, clearing the wall by less than 5 feet. The men on her wing were exposed to hurricane-force winds, clinging to cargo straps while the world tried to tear them away. Johnson's blood streamed back in red ribbons, whipped away by the slipstream. Veronica climbed as gently as she dared, fighting the urge to pull up hard. Too much G-force would rip the men from the wing. Too little altitude meant flying through the worst of the turbulence. She threaded the needle, ascending at a shallow angle while the sandstorm battered them from all sides. "Faraday, you still with me?" she called over the external radio. His voice came back wind-torn and strained. "Still here." Johnson's unconscious but breathing. "Hold on, we're going to altitude." The climb to 3,000 feet took an eternity. Every gust of wind threatened to flip them inverted. Every bump of turbulence bounced the men on the wing like dice in a cup. Veronica flew with surgical precision, making minute adjustments to keep the ride as smooth as possible while still maintaining climbing airspeed. When they finally broke through the top of the storm, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost immediately began forming on exposed skin. Faraday and Johnson were wearing combat gear, not pressure suits. At this altitude and these temperatures, they'd develop hypothermia in minutes. "Tower, Reaper 2-1, Veronica transmitted, declaring emergency. "I have 2 personnel externally mounted on my aircraft. 1 urgent surgical. Request direct routing to Kandahar and medical standing by." The tower controller's voice was professionally calm, but she could hear the disbelief underneath. "Reaper, say again. You have personnel on your wing." "Affirmative. Long story. Just get me a clear approach and crash equipment standing by." "Copy, Reaper. All aircraft cleared from your approach path. Emergency vehicles mobilizing. Say your fuel state." She checked the gauge. 20 minutes, maybe less. "Reaper, nearest suitable airfield is Kandahar at your 12 o'clock, 35 miles." The math was impossible. She'd burned too much fuel in the storm, too much during the attack runs, too much during the landing and takeoff from hell. Even at maximum endurance speed, she'd be running on fumes before she reached the airfield. "Copy," she said simply. "Reaper's inbound." She leveled off at 3,000 feet and pushed the throttles forward, trading altitude for speed. The A-10 was designed to fly low and slow, but tonight it would have to fly high and fast. She trimmed the aircraft for maximum efficiency, feeling the controls respond with the sensitivity of long familiarity. Faraday's voice came through again, weaker this time. "Reaper, can't feel my hands." "Stay with me, Commander. 20 minutes. You've survived worse." "Have I?" The question hung in the cold air. Veronica didn't answer it. Some things were better left in the past, buried under years and choices and the brutal calculus of survival. The moonlit desert scrolled beneath them, peaceful and indifferent. She checked Johnson's position on the wing through her mirrors, still secured, still breathing as far as she could tell. Faraday was hunched over him, using his body to shield the wounded man from the worst of the wind. 10 minutes to Kandahar, fuel gauge dropping toward empty. The compound was 30 miles behind them, but she could still see smoke rising above the sandstorm, a dark column in the moonlight. The tower frequency crackled with new traffic. Major Keller's voice, tight with controlled urgency. "Reaper Ops, what's your situation?" "2 souls on my wing. 1 critical, fuel state critical, everything else nominal." "Reaper," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "You know you can't land with them on the wing. The gear deployment, the angle of attack, the impact forces. They'll be torn off." "I'm aware. So what's the plan?" She'd been working through the problem for the past 5 minutes, running scenarios in her head. None of them were good. All of them ended with people dead or maimed. But some bad options were less bad than others. "I'm going to come in low and slow over the runway. Fire and rescue will pace me with the crashed truck. At 10 feet AGL, Faraday unstraps and drops with Johnson. Crash crew grabs them before I overshoot." Silence on the radio. "Then, that's insane." "You have a better idea." More silence. She could imagine Keller in the operations center, staring at the radio, trying to think of an alternative that didn't exist. "Reaper, the timing would have to be perfect. 1 second too early and they fall onto concrete. 1 second too late and you're in the overrun with no room to stop." "Then I guess I better not screw up." "And what about you, after you drop them?" Veronica glanced at her fuel gauge. The needle was kissing the empty mark. "I'll figure something out." "Reaper." "Save it, sir. We're committed. Just make sure that crash crew knows what's happening." She switched frequencies and began her approach, descending through the night toward the sprawl of lights that marked Kandahar airfield. Behind her, she could hear Faraday speaking to Johnson in low tones, the words lost to the wind but the intent clear. A commander comforting his dying soldier, a friend refusing to let go. The runway lights appeared ahead, 2 parallel lines of white stretching into infinity. Veronica configured for landing, dropping flaps and lowering the landing gear. The A-10's sink rate increased immediately. She compensated with power, balancing thrust and drag in a delicate equilibrium. "Crash 1, Reaper," she called. "You in position." "Reaper, Crash 1, we're rolling parallel to the runway. Say your altitude." 500 feet, descending. Airspeed 120 knots. I'll maintain 10 feet AGL for as long as I can hold it." "Copy, will match your speed. Give us the word when to move in." The approach required absolute precision. Too fast and Faraday couldn't safely drop. Too slow and she'd stall with 2 men on her wing. Too high and the fall would kill them. Too low and she'd hit the runway before they could clear. Veronica descended through 300 feet, eyes locked on the approaching runway. The world narrowed to instruments and sight picture and the feel of the aircraft through her hands. 200 feet. 100. She leveled off at 50 feet, letting the A-10 settle into ground effect where the cushion of compressed air beneath the wings provided extra lift. The runway threshold flashed underneath. She was committed now, flying a powered descent down the runway at 10 feet while men clung to her wing in the darkness. The crashed truck paced her on the parallel taxiway, its lights illuminating the scene in harsh white glare. "Faraday, you ready?" she called. "Ready." His voice was barely audible over the engine noise. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, mark." She chopped the throttles and pulled back on the stick, forcing the nose up. The A-10 ballooned slightly, climbing to 15 feet. The maneuver broke the perfect balance of her approach, but it gave Faraday the extra second he needed. He unclipped from the wing and dropped, holding Johnson against his chest, twisting in midair to take the impact on his back. They hit the runway hard, tumbling in a controlled fall that was equal parts training and desperation. The crash truck screeched to a stop beside them, emergency personnel swarming out before they'd even finished rolling. Veronica pushed the throttles forward, trying to arrest her descent and climb back to pattern altitude. The engine spooled up, but not quickly enough. The nose dropped. The main gear kissed the runway with a chirp of rubber on concrete. She was on the ground with no fuel and no plan, and no way to stop before running out of runway. The end of the pavement was coming up fast. Beyond it, sand and rocks and a drainage ditch that would flip the A-10 nose-over tail. Veronica stood on the brakes, feeling the carbon discs heat to incandescence. The anti-skid system cycled frantically, grabbing and releasing as the computer tried to prevent a skid. 300 feet remaining, 200, 100. The A-10 stopped with its nose wheel hanging over the drainage ditch. Veronica sat in the cockpit, her hands still locked on the controls, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the oxygen system. The tower frequency was chaos, multiple voices talking over each other, but she couldn't process the words. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the tick of cooling engines. The next hours passed in a blur of debrief and medical checks, and the slow return to a reality that felt less real than the mission. Veronica sat in a plastic chair in the squadron-ready room, while a flight surgeon checked her vitals and a safety officer asked the same questions 17 different ways. She answered mechanically, her mind still flying the approach, still feeling the weight of the men on her wing. Lieutenant Commander Faraday found her there at 800 when the sun was just beginning to burn off the night's chill. His hands were bandaged. Frostbite, the medics had said. 2nd degree. He'd lost some skin but kept all his fingers. Johnson was in surgery but expected to survive. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "They told me you landed that thing with a fuel gauge showing empty. Said you probably had 30 seconds of flight time left." Veronica looked up at him. He'd aged since she'd last seen him, 6 years before on a different base in a different war. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His hair showed gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same, that particular shade of gray-blue that reminded her of winter oceans. 30 seconds is 30 seconds, she said. "You could have died. All 3 of us could have died." "Yeah." He sat down beside her, moving carefully, his back obviously bruised from the fall. "Why did you do it?" The question was simple, the answer wasn't. "Because Johnson deserved to go home," she said finally. "Because you deserved not to watch another one of your men die. Because someone needed to do something, and I was the one in position to do it." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Faraday studied her face, reading the lines that combat had written there. "The last time I saw you was Bagram, 2019. You were about to wash out of fighters because your section commander said women couldn't handle the stress of combat aviation." "I remember. I told you to quit, said it wasn't worth fighting a system designed to break you." "I remember that too. You didn't listen." Veronica smiled without humor, never been good at taking advice. "You proved them all wrong, every single one of them." She didn't respond. Proving people wrong had stopped mattering somewhere around her 50th combat mission, when she'd realized that respect and redemption were different things, and she was only ever going to get one of them. Major Keller appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted but vindicated. Behind him stood the squadron's younger pilots, including Lieutenant Drummond, who'd smirked at her in the hallway 12 hours before. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something closer to awe. "Captain Hale," Keller said formally, "I've just gotten off the phone with the wing commander. He wanted me to tell you personally that your actions last night were the most extraordinary display of airmanship he's witnessed in 30 years of service. There's going to be a commendation, probably several." "Sir, I just did the job." "No, you did what everyone else said was impossible." Drummond stepped forward, his face flushed. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for what I said before. It was disrespectful and uncalled for." Veronica looked at the young lieutenant, seeing herself 10 years ago, all swagger and insecurity wrapped in a flight suit. "Drummond, you know why they call me Reaper?" He shook his head. "It's not because I'm death from above. It's because I survived something everyone said should have killed me. 2018, over Raqqa, I took an SA-7 through the right engine. Hydraulics gone. Flight controls compromised. Should have punched out, but my wingman was down and I couldn't leave him. So I flew a dead aircraft back to base on one engine and pure stubbornness. When I finally landed, the crew chief said the only thing holding the plane together was my refusal to die." She stood up, meeting his eyes. "They gave me the call sign Reaper not because I deliver death, but because I won't let it take me or the people I'm responsible for. Remember that the next time you want to judge someone based on age or gender or whether they fly the pretty aircraft." Drummond nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Faraday watched the exchange with quiet intensity. When the others had filed out, he spoke again. "You never answered my question. Not really." "Which one?" "Why you came back, after everything. After washing out of fighters the first time, after the Article 15, after everyone told you to quit, why did you keep trying?" Veronica was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun had fully risen, painting the Afghan sky in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere out there, 8 SEALs were safe because she'd refused to accept the impossible. "You remember that night in Kandahar?" she asked. 2017. The FOB got overrun. You and your team held the perimeter while everyone else evacuated." Faraday's expression shifted, memory playing across his features. "I remember. I was the last bird out. They wanted me to leave without you. Said your team was already overrun, already dead, and staying just meant losing a pilot and aircraft. I told them to screw themselves and came in anyway. Landed in the middle of that firefight, loaded all 15 of you, and got out by the skin of my teeth. You saved our lives. And when I got back, they grounded me. Said I'd violated orders and endangered an aircraft by taking an unacceptable risk. My section commander recommended I be removed from combat aviation. Said I couldn't be trusted to follow rules and that made me a liability. The Article 15 came 3 weeks later. After that, no fighter unit would take me." She turned to face him fully. "So I went to the A-10 community, flew the ugly plane everyone else looked down on, took every dangerous,